The silver-haired man crushed the photograph in his fist and hurled it across the hotel room. "She's pregnant and broke," Victor Kane snarled into his phone. "Her husband is dead. I made sure of that 4 months ago. Now she inherits the one property I've been hunting for 30 years. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Find her. Watch her. The moment she discovers what's hidden in that warehouse, I want to know. And if she won't sell..." He paused, straightening his expensive tie in the mirror. Well, accidents happen to pregnant women all the time. Before we continue this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and follow Sarah's journey to the very end. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The phone call that would change everything came at the worst possible moment. Sarah Mitchell was on her knees in the bathroom of her Pittsburgh apartment, one hand braced against the toilet, the other pressed against her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, and the morning sickness hadn't let up. Neither had anything else in her life. Her cell phone buzzed on the cracked tile floor. She ignored it. It buzzed again. "Go away," she muttered, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. The third buzz made her grab for it, if only to make the noise stop. The screen showed an unknown number from Lancaster County. "Hello?" Her voice came out raspy, broken. "Mrs. Mitchell? Mrs. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell." "Who's asking?" "This is Robert Garrison from Garrison and Associates. I'm calling about your inheritance." Sarah almost laughed. "Almost. You've got the wrong number. I don't have anything to inherit." "Are you the great niece of Theodore Marcus Mitchell of Millbrook, Pennsylvania?" Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Theodore. Her mother had mentioned that name exactly once years ago after too much wine at Christmas. "Some great-uncle I never met. Mom said he was crazy, lived like a hermit." "Your great-uncle passed away 6 months ago, Mrs. Mitchell. You're his sole surviving heir." Sarah pulled herself up from the bathroom floor, her free hand steadying herself against the wall. "I don't understand. I never even met him." "Nevertheless, he named you specifically in his will. The estate includes a 2-acre property in Millbrook, including a warehouse that formerly housed his business, Mitchell Custom Woodworks." "A warehouse?" Sarah caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink. Dark circles under her eyes. Cheekbones too sharp from skipped meals. Hair that hadn't been properly washed in days. "What am I supposed to do with a warehouse?" "That's entirely your decision, Mrs. Mitchell, but the property is yours, free and clear. Taxes are paid through next year. Whatever you decide to do with it, it belongs to you now." After she hung up, Sarah stood in her tiny bathroom for a long time staring at the phone in her hand. An inheritance. From a great-uncle she'd never met. A warehouse in a town she'd never heard of. It sounded like a scam. It sounded too good to be true. But then again, Sarah had stopped believing in too good to be true 4 months ago when 2 police officers had knocked on her door to tell her that Derek was dead. She walked into the living room where the eviction notice was still taped to the inside of the front door. 72 hours. That's how long she had before the landlord changed the locks and threw her belongings on the curb. $96 in her checking account. A baby due in 2 months. A stack of medical bills she couldn't pay, and a dead husband who'd been their only source of real income. Sarah sat down on the couch Derek had built with his own hands, the cushions worn soft from years of use. She pressed her palm flat against her belly and felt the baby kick. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Should we go see what crazy Uncle Theodore left us?" The baby kicked again. "Yeah," Sarah said. "I thought so too." 2 days later, she was loading the last box into her aging Honda Civic when her landlord appeared on the front steps. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" Mr. Brennan crossed his arms, watching her struggle with a box that was too heavy for her condition. Sarah didn't look at him. "I'm leaving. That's what you wanted." "I wanted the rent you owed me. 3 months of it. You'll get it." She had no idea how, but she said it anyway. "I'll send a check when I'm settled." Brennan snorted. "Sure you will. Heading back to Mommy and Daddy?" "They're dead." The words came out flat, emotionless. Sarah had learned to say them that way. Any other tone invited questions, sympathy, pity. She didn't have energy for any of those things. Brennan's expression flickered, but he didn't apologize. "Well, wherever you're going, good luck. You're going to need it." Sarah slammed the trunk closed. "I've needed luck my whole life, Mr. Brennan. Hasn't shown up yet. I doubt it's going to start now." She drove away without looking back. The 4-hour drive from Pittsburgh to Millbrook took her through landscapes she'd never seen. The city's steel-gray skyline gave way to suburbs, then farmland, then the rolling hills of Pennsylvania Dutch country. The The deeper she drove into rural America, the further she felt from the life that had collapsed around her. Derek would have loved this drive. He'd always talked about moving somewhere quiet, somewhere they could raise kids and build a life that didn't involve cramped apartments and double shifts. "We'll get there someday," he used to say, pulling her close after long days. "You and me and as many babies as you want. A house with a big yard. Maybe a workshop where I can build furniture." Someday had never come. Sarah blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Not now, not while she was driving, not while their baby was depending on her to keep it together. Her phone's GPS announced the turn into Millbrook, and Sarah found herself on a main street that looked like something from a different era. One traffic light, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a diner called Rosie's Kitchen with pickup trucks parked outside. She didn't stop, not yet. The GPS led her 3 miles past town down a road that grew narrower and more potholed with every quarter mile. Then she saw it. A rusted gate hung open on broken hinges. Above it a sign so faded she could barely read it, Mitchell Custom Woodworks Est, 1952. Sarah pulled through the gate and stopped the car. The property stretched before her, maybe 2 acres of land gone wild with neglect. Weeds had swallowed what might once have been a parking lot. Trees had grown up through cracks in the concrete. A rusted pickup truck sat on flat tires near what looked like a loading dock, and at the center of it all, rising against the gray December sky, stood the warehouse. It was massive. 3 stories of red brick with arched windows that had been boarded over or shattered by time. A smaller structure attached to one side might have been offices. The whole thing looked like it should have been condemned decades ago. "This is it," Sarah said aloud. "This is my inheritance." She got out of the car, pulling her thin coat tight against the cold. The wind cut through her, carrying the smell of dead leaves and something else. Machine oil, maybe. The ghost of whatever work had happened here before it was abandoned. Sarah approached the main doors. They were secured with a padlock, but not an old one. This lock was new shiny steel that stood out against the weathered wood. Someone had been here recently. She circled the building looking for another way in. Most windows were boarded from inside. The side door was chained, but not locked. If she turned sideways, she could squeeze through the gap. Inside the warehouse smelled of dust and time and secrets. Shafts of gray light filtered through cracks in the boards, illuminating shapes that gradually resolved into machinery. Lathes, drill presses, band saws, workbenches lined the walls, still holding tools arranged with precision, and everywhere abandoned projects. A violin without its strings, a piano mechanism in pieces, the frame of something intricate that Sarah couldn't identify. Theodore Mitchell had been a craftsman. Whatever he'd done here, he'd done it with care. But why had he stopped? Sarah moved deeper into the building, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The attached office building called to her, but the door was locked. Through a dusty window, she could see filing cabinets, a desk paper scattered across every surface. Answers. There were answers in there. She just had to find a way to reach them. The light was fading. Sarah checked her phone. 4:47 p.m. Sunset was coming and she had nowhere to stay. She'd planned to find a motel, but the nearest one was 20 miles back toward the highway. 20 miles of gas she couldn't afford to waste. "One night in the car won't kill us," she told her belly. "We've done harder things." She pulled the Honda close to the warehouse under an overhang that would block some of the wind. Wrapped in every blanket she owned, she settled into the back seat and tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old building made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. The baby shifted constantly as if sensing her mother's unease. Around midnight, Sarah was finally drifting off when a sound brought her fully awake. An engine. Getting closer. She lay frozen, watching through her window as headlights swept across the property. A car pulled up near the main gate and stopped. The headlights cut off. A figure emerged. Tall, wearing a long overcoat, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. A flashlight clicked on its beam, sweeping across the warehouse exterior. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Who was this? Why were they here in the middle of the night? The figure approached the main doors, examined the new padlock, then moved around the building, searching. The flashlight beam passed within feet of her car. She held her breath. The figure didn't notice her. Instead, it found the same side door she'd used earlier and slipped inside. For 20 minutes, Sarah watched the flashlight beam move behind the boarded windows, appearing and disappearing as the intruder searched. Then the figure emerged, phone pressed to ear. The voice carried in the still night. "Nothing obvious. The place is intact. He never sold the equipment. If it's here, it's hidden." A pause. No sign of the heir. The lawyers said she's some waitress from Pittsburgh, 7 months pregnant, about to be evicted. She probably won't even bother to claim it. Another pause. Victor, I understand the timeline. You've been waiting 30 years, but I can't find something that isn't here. Give me more time. The name hit Sarah like a punch. Victor. She knew that name. She'd grown up hearing that name spoken in whispers and curses and tears. Victor Kane, the man who'd destroyed her family. 12 years ago, Sarah's father had owned a catering business, successful, growing the pride of his life. Then a consultant named Victor Kane had convinced him to mortgage everything for an expansion that existed only on paper. The money vanished into shell companies. Her father died of a heart attack 6 months later. Her mother followed 2 years after. Sarah had been 20 years old, suddenly orphaned, working 3 jobs to survive. And now Victor Kane's name was being spoken by a stranger searching her great-uncle's warehouse in the middle of the night. The intruder got back in his car and drove away. Sarah lay in the darkness, shaking her mind, racing. This wasn't coincidence. Victor Kane was looking for something here, something valuable enough to stake out an abandoned warehouse, something her great-uncle had hidden, and if Kane wanted it, Sarah was going to find it first. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah's back screamed from sleeping in the car, and the baby had positioned itself directly on her bladder, but her mind was clear in a way it hadn't been since Derek's death. She had purpose now, an enemy to fight, a mystery to solve. Her first stop was the diner in town. Rosie's kitchen was warm, smelling of coffee and bacon, nearly empty at 7 in the morning. An older black woman stood behind the counter, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, eyes sharp and assessing. "Morning, honey. You look like you need coffee and about 12 hours of sleep." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Coffee would be a start." "Sit anywhere you like. I'm Rosie Mae Johnson. Owned this place 40 years. Sarah slid into a booth near the window. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I just inherited a property outside of town." Rosie Mae's hand froze on the coffee pot. "Mitchell, you're Theo's kin. His great niece. I never met him." The older woman set down the pot and slid into the booth across from Sarah. Her expression had changed, sharpening with interest. "Honey, you just became the most interesting person in Millbrook. Theo Mitchell was a legend around here." "What kind of legend?" "The good kind. Finest craftsman in 3 counties. Made furniture, restored antiques, but his real specialty was mechanical things. Clocks, music boxes, automata. Mechanical figures. Like robots, but old. Some of them centuries old. Rich folks from all over the world sent him broken treasures, and Theo fixed them." Rosie Mae's eyes grew distant. "Then about 30 years ago, he just stopped. Closed the business overnight. Fired all his workers, became a hermit." Sarah leaned forward. "Why, nobody knows for certain. Some said he had a breakdown. Some said he was scared of something." Rosie Mae lowered her voice. "I think he was protecting something valuable." "What makes you say that?" "Because about 5 years before he died, some men came looking for him. City types in expensive suits, asked a lot of questions about his work, his clients. Theo saw them coming and didn't answer his door for 2 weeks straight." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What did these men look like?" "One was silver-haired, real smooth, talked like a television preacher. The other was younger, big and mean-looking." "Silver-haired, smooth. Victor Kane. Did you ever hear the name Victor Kane?" Rosie Mae's expression darkened. "Can't say I did. But I know trouble when I see it, and those men were trouble. They came back a few times over the years. Theo was terrified of them." Sarah wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Someone was at the warehouse last night, searching." "Then you'd better find whatever Theo was hiding before they do." After breakfast, which Rosie Mae refused to let her pay for, Sarah drove to the county courthouse. Property records, business licenses, tax documents. She needed to understand what she'd inherited. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when Sarah approached. "Help you. I'm looking for records on a property in Millbrook, Mitchell Custom Woodworks." "Mitchell?" The woman's eyebrows rose. "You family, his great niece. I just inherited the property." "Well, isn't that something?" The clerk stood adjusting her glasses. "Follow me." In a back room filled with filing cabinets, the clerk pulled folders and spread them across a table. Property deeds. Business licenses. Tax records spanning decades. "Theodore Mitchell purchased that property in 1952, the clerk explained. Ran his business there for 40 years. Paid his taxes on time, never had any complaints filed against him. Then in 1993, he closed up shop and became a recluse. Do you know why? Nobody does, but there's something else you should know." The clerk pulled out another file. About 10 years ago, someone tried to buy that property, made several offers, all rejected. They got pushy about it. Theo filed a harassment complaint. Who was making the offers? The clerk flipped through papers. A company called Ashworth Antiquities, based out of New York. Never heard of them before or since. Ashworth Antiquities. Sarah filed the name away. One more thing, the clerk said. Theo sold his house about 15 years ago to a man named Henry Blackwood. Still lives there, far as I know. He worked for Theo back in the day. If anyone knows what your great-uncle was hiding, it might be him. Sarah found Henry Blackwood's farmhouse 3 miles from the warehouse. A red mailbox marked the driveway. The house itself was modest but beautifully maintained, with a wraparound porch and smoke rising from the chimney. She knocked on the door. The man who answered was in his 60s, tall and lean, with calloused hands and gray in his close-cropped hair. He looked at Sarah's face for a long moment before speaking. "You've got Theo's eyes." Sarah blinked. "Everyone keeps saying that." "Because it's true. I'm Henry Blackwood. You'd better come in." The inside of the farmhouse was warm and smelled of wood smoke. Every piece of furniture showed the touch of a master craftsman's smooth joints and elegant lines. "You made all this?" Sarah asked. "Theo taught me. I was his apprentice for 15 years. Henry gestured to a chair near the wood stove. "Sit. You look exhausted." "I'm 7 months pregnant, and I slept in my car last night." "Good Lord, child. Why?" Sarah sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Because I inherited a property I never knew existed from a great-uncle I never met, and someone's already looking for whatever he was hiding." Henry's expression sharpened. "Tell me everything." She did. The letter from the lawyer, the late-night intruder, the name Victor Kane, the harassment complaint against Ashworth Antiquities. Henry listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the winter landscape. "I knew this day would come," he said finally. "Theo always said blood would find blood." "What does that mean?" "It means he was waiting for someone from his family to inherit what he left behind." Henry turned to face her. "Theo was the finest craftsman I ever knew. He could fix anything, build anything, restore anything. But his specialty was automata. Mechanical figures, some of them centuries old." "Rosie May told me." "Did she tell you about the commission?" Sarah shook her head. "In 1991, a wealthy collector hired Theo to restore something valuable. Very valuable. An automaton that was supposedly lost, damaged beyond repair. Theo worked on it for 2 years. I helped with some of the basic work, but the fine work he did alone, in his private studio." "What happened?" "The collector died before the restoration was complete, and then Theo got scared. Really scared. He closed the business, fired. Everyone went into hiding. Never told me why." "But you have a guess?" Henry nodded slowly. "I think someone else wanted what Theo had. Someone dangerous, and I think Theo spent the last 30 years of his life hiding it." "Victor Kane?" "Maybe. Probably. Theo never said the name, but he was terrified of whoever was chasing him." Sarah pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby shift. "The man I saw last night mentioned that name. Victor Kane. He said Victor had been waiting 30 years. Henry's jaw tightened. "Then it's true. And if Victor Kane is still looking after all this time, whatever Theo was hiding must be worth a fortune. How do I find it?" "I don't know. Theo was clever. He built puzzles into everything, hidden compartments, secret mechanisms. If he hid something in that warehouse, it won't be easy to find." Henry paused. "But I know someone who might help. Theo kept records, detailed records of all his work. He had a locked drawer in his office, always kept it locked." "I never knew what was inside." "The office building is locked too. I might have a key." Henry crossed to an old dresser and pulled out a key ring. "Theo gave me this when he closed the shop. Said if anyone ever came looking for answers, I should help them find them." He held up the keys. "I've been holding on to these for 30 years, waiting for a Mitchell to claim them." They drove to the warehouse together, Henry's pickup truck bouncing along the rutted road. The winter sun was high now, casting long shadows across the overgrown property. "It looks worse than I remembered," Henry said, surveying the decay. "Theo would have hated seeing it like this." "I'll fix it up, if there's anything here worth fixing." Inside the warehouse was exactly as Sarah had left it. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light. Machinery hulked in the shadows. The unfinished projects waited on their workbenches. Henry moved through the space with the familiarity of someone who'd spent years here. He touched tools, adjusted items, his expression growing more sorrowful with each step. "This was my life once," he said quietly. "The happiest years I ever knew. Learning from Theo, creating beautiful things." "Why did you stay in Millbrook after he closed?" "Because he asked me to. Said someone needed to watch over the place. Said someday someone from his family would come and they'd need help." Henry looked at her. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah, even though I didn't know your name." They reached the office building. The key fit smoothly in the lock and the door swung open with a groan of protest. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A desk sat in the center of the room, papers still scattered across its surface. Certificates hung on the walls, too, covered in grime to read. "Where's the locked drawer?" Sarah asked. Henry pointed to the desk. "Bottom right. Theo always kept it locked. Even I never saw inside." Sarah tried the keys until one fit. The drawer slid open. Inside were files marked with initials and dates, photographs, documents in multiple languages, and something that made Sarah's breath catch, a photograph of an automaton. It showed a mechanical figure, a woman seated at a tiny harpsichord. Her porcelain face was serene, her glass eyes hauntingly lifelike. Her hands rested on the keyboard, poised to play. "The composer's Muse," Henry breathed. "That's what Theo called it. I never saw the finished piece." Sarah flipped through the documents. Certificates of provenance, letters between Theodore and someone named Edmund Hartley, technical drawings of mechanisms so complex they looked like art. And then she found the letter, dated February 1993, addressed to Theodore Mitchell. "Mr. Mitchell, my associates inform me that you have completed the restoration of the Hartley automaton. As the rightful representative of the Hartley estate, I am prepared to take possession immediately. However, I should warn you that my patience has limits. Edmund Hartley's death has created complications. There are those who might question the legality of your possession. I trust we can resolve this matter amicably. Victor Kane." Sarah's hands shook. "He was blackmailing Theo." "Theo never told me, but it explains why he was so scared." Henry took the letter, reading it again. "Victor Kane must have been trying to steal the automaton. Theo hid it to protect it. And Kane's been looking ever since." Sarah gathered the documents. "Is there anything else in that drawer?" Henry reached in and pulled out a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with inlaid patterns. "This, I don't know what it is." Sarah took the box. It was heavier than it looked, warm somehow, as if it held captured sunlight. She turned it over in her hands, looking for a way to open it. "It's a puzzle box," Henry said. "Theo made them sometimes. You have to find the right sequence to unlock it." Sarah pressed slid twisted. Nothing worked. But as she examined the inlay pattern, something struck her. These mountains look familiar. It's the view from the warehouse, that ridge to the north. Sarah studied the box more closely. Among the mountain patterns, she found a small tree that was slightly different from the others. She pressed it. A click. A panel slid open. Inside was a key, ornate old-fashioned with an unusual pattern of teeth, and beneath it a note in handwriting that matched the documents. "Blood will find blood. What's hidden waits for family." Sarah looked up at Henry. He knew. He knew someone would come. The question is, what did he hide, and where? Before Sarah could answer, the sound of an engine made them both freeze. Through the dusty office window, Sarah saw a black sedan pulling through the gate. The same car she'd seen last night, and stepping out of the driver's seat, brushing invisible lint from his expensive overcoat, was a silver-haired man with a smile like a knife. "Get down," Henry hissed. "That's them." "Yes." They ducked below the window line as footsteps approached the warehouse. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she was sure the intruder could hear it. "Mr. Garrison said the heir arrived yesterday," a voice said outside, smooth-cultured, dangerous. "A pregnant widow from Pittsburgh. Perfect." "Want me to check the office?" Another voice, deeper, rougher. "Not yet. Let's see what our dear Mrs. Mitchell has discovered first. The lawyers are supposed to contact her about a buyout offer. $50,000 for the property, no questions asked. If she's smart, she'll take it and disappear. And if she's not smart," a low laugh, "then we'll have to be more persuasive. Accidents happen, Marcus, especially to pregnant women who ask too many questions." The footsteps moved away. Sarah and Henry stayed frozen until they heard the car drive off. Only then did Sarah let herself breathe. "They're going to offer to buy the property," she whispered. "They think I don't know anything." "Ping." "Do you want to sell?" Sarah looked at the key in her hand, at the document spread across the desk. at the photograph of an automaton worth millions. "No," she said. "I want to find out what they're looking for, and I want to find it first." Henry nodded slowly. "Then we'd better start searching. But Sarah, these people are dangerous. Victor Kane didn't get where he is by being gentle. If he's been looking for 30 years... "I know," Sarah slipped the key into her pocket. "But I'm not alone, and I'm not going to run." She thought of Derek, of his crooked smile and his big dreams, of the way he'd promised they'd build a life together. She thought of her parents, of the business Victor Kane had destroyed, of the lives he'd ruined without consequences. And she thought of her baby, the child she was carrying who deserved a mother who fought back. "Let's find out what Theodore Mitchell was hiding," she said, "and then let's make Victor Kane pay for everything he's done." The search began in earnest. For 3 days, Sarah and Henry combed through the warehouse. They checked floorboards, tapped walls, examined every piece of equipment. The puzzle box key had to fit something, but they couldn't find what. Rosie May brought them food and updates. "That silver-haired man's been asking questions around town. Wants to know about Theo, about the property, about you." "What are people telling him, Paul?" "Nothing useful. Folks around here don't trust outsiders, especially ones who drive fancy cars and talk like lawyers." On the 4th day, Sarah found something. She was examining the main floor, trying to understand the warehouse's layout. Something had been bothering her since her first day here, something about proportions. "Henry, how tall is this building?" 3 stories, maybe 40 feet. "But look at the ceiling. It's maybe 30 feet up at most. Where's the 3rd floor?" Henry's eyes widened. "There isn't a 3rd floor, not inside." "So where does the extra space go?" They studied the floor. Most of it was solid concrete echoing firmly beneath their feet. But near a large metal cabinet in the southeast corner, the sound changed. Hollow. They moved the cabinet together, straining against its weight. Beneath it, the concrete had a seam. Barely visible, but definitely there. "A trap door," Sarah breathed. "In 20 years of working here, I never knew." Henry ran his fingers along the edge. "How does it open?" Sarah pulled out the puzzle box key. "I think I know." But there was no keyhole. The trapdoor was sealed, its mechanism hidden. "Theo loved puzzles," Henry said. "Hidden triggers, secret combinations." Sarah examined the cabinet they'd moved. It was bolted to the floor, or had been until the bolts were loosened. Inside, it was empty except for a single shelf at the bottom. On the shelf sat a music box. Sarah's breath caught. It was beautiful, maybe 8 inches tall, with inlaid wood forming a mountain landscape. A small crank protruded from one side. "Theo made this for his niece," Henry said. "Your grandmother. I remember when he gave it to her." Sarah wound the crank. A melody emerged, haunting and strange, somehow familiar, like something she'd heard as a child. As the music played, something clicked beneath the floor. The trapdoor rose an inch, unsealed by some hidden mechanism. "The music box is the trigger," Sarah said. "You need it to open the door." She inserted the puzzle box key into a slot that had appeared in the trapdoor's edge. It turned smoothly. The door swung up, revealing stairs, descending into darkness. Sarah looked at Henry. "Ready." "After 30 years of wondering child, I was born ready." They descended. The stairs went down perhaps 15 feet, ending in a short corridor lit by emergency LED strips that flickered to life as they entered. Climate control equipment hummed softly. At the end of the corridor, a heavy wooden door stood closed. Sarah tried the key. It fit. The door swung open. And there, in the center of a climate-controlled room, surrounded by workbenches and tools and decades of secrets, sat the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen. The composer's Muse. The automaton was exactly as the photograph had shown, but photographs couldn't capture her presence. 3 feet tall, a woman of porcelain and silk and secrets seated at her tiny harpsichord. Her glass eyes seemed to watch them. Her hands waited on the keys. "My God," Henry whispered. "He finished it. He really finished it." Sarah approached slowly, afraid to break the spell. Up close, the craftsmanship was staggering. Every detail perfect, every mechanism precise. Does it work?" Henry found the winding mechanism. Only one way to find out. He turned the key carefully, and the composer's Muse began to play. Her hands moved with impossible grace, fingers striking the keys in a complex melody. Her head turned slightly as she played. Her chest rose and fell in a perfect imitation of breathing. The music filled the hidden room notes that had waited 30 years to be heard again. When it ended, Sarah realized she was crying. What's it worth? She asked. Millions, maybe tens of millions. Henry's voice was thick with emotion. The last automaton like this sold for $12 million at auction, and this one is perfect. Sarah thought of Victor Kane, of his smooth threats and his dangerous patience, of 30 years spent hunting for this treasure. She thought of her parents, of Derek, of everyone Kane had hurt to get what he wanted, and she thought of her baby growing inside her, depending on her to make the right choice. He's not getting it, she said. Victor Kane is not getting this. How do we stop him? Before Sarah could answer, a sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps on the warehouse floor, and then a voice echoing down the hidden stairs. Mrs. Mitchell, I know you're down there. We need to talk about your inheritance. Victor Kane had found them. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The voice echoed down the hidden stairs, smooth and patient like a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Mrs. Mitchell, please don't make this difficult. I've waited 30 years. I can wait a few more minutes. Henry grabbed Sarah's arm. There has to be another way out. Theo wouldn't build a room with only one exit. Sarah forced herself to think past the terror. Her great-uncle had been paranoid, careful, brilliant. He'd hidden this room for 30 years. He would have planned for this. The back wall, she whispered. It looks different from the others. Henry moved quickly, running his hands along the wall behind the workbenches. Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs now. Kane was coming down. Here. Shh. Henry found a section that gave slightly under pressure. There's a panel. Then open it. I'm trying. There's a mechanism. The footsteps grew louder. Sarah could see shadows moving at the corridor's end. Henry! Almost got it. A figure appeared in the doorway. Victor Kane, silver-haired and smiling with a larger man looming behind him. Kane's eyes swept the room and landed on the automaton. His smile widened. There she is, he breathed. The composer's muse, after all this time. Sarah stepped in front of the automaton, her hand pressed against her belly. Don't come any closer. Mrs. Mitchell, please, let's be civilized. Kane spread his hands in a gesture of false peace. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to make you a very generous offer. I know who you are. Kane's eyebrows rose. Do you, Victor Kane. You destroyed my father's business 12 years ago, stole everything he had. He died because of you. Something flickered in Kane's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or amusement. Mitchell, of course. I remember your father, a stubborn man, refused to see reason. He took a step forward. Don't make his mistake, Sarah. This automaton belongs to my clients. Your great-uncle stole it from the Hartley estate. I have documents that say otherwise. Theodore owned it legally. Documents can be challenged. Courts can be persuaded. Kane's voice hardened. But I'd rather avoid all that unpleasantness. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000. Cash, untraceable. You take your money, disappear, raise your baby somewhere nice. Everyone wins. Sarah heard a soft click behind her. The hidden panel had opened. And if I say no, Kane's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. Then things become complicated. You're a pregnant widow with no resources, no connections, no one to help you. I have lawyers, money, and patience. I can make your life very difficult, Mrs. Mitchell, or I can make it very easy. The choice is yours. Sarah took a step backward toward the open panel. My answer is no. Think carefully. This is your only chance to walk away clean. You killed my father. You've been terrorizing my family for decades. Sarah's voice shook, but she didn't look away. You're not getting this automaton. Not today. Not ever. Kane's expression finally cracked. The pleasant mask fell away, revealing something ugly underneath. Marcus, he said quietly, get the automaton. The large man moved forward. Sarah grabbed the nearest object, a heavy tool from the workbench, and swung it at his head. Marcus dodged, but the swing bought precious seconds. Henry seized Sarah's arm and pulled her through the hidden panel into darkness. They ran. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for Henry's broad shoulders. Sarah's pregnant belly scraped against the walls as they stumbled forward. Behind them she heard cursing, then footsteps. They're following. Keep moving. There's light ahead. The passage sloped upward, ending at a rough wooden door half hidden by tree roots. Henry threw his weight against it. The door burst open, and they emerged into the winter afternoon, gasping. They were at the creek bank, maybe 100 yards from the warehouse. Henry's truck was parked at his farmhouse half a mile away. Can you run? Henry asked. I'll have to. They ran. Sarah's lungs burned, and her back screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The baby kicked hard as if urging her forward. Behind them, shouts. Kane and his man had found the exit. Henry's farmhouse appeared through the trees. The truck was parked in the driveway, keys hidden under the driver's seat where Henry always kept them. They reached the truck just as a black sedan appeared on the road behind them. Henry gunned the engine and they roared away in a spray of gravel. Sarah looked back. The sedan wasn't following. Why aren't they chasing us? Because they got what they wanted. Henry's voice was grim. The automaton is still in that room. They'll take it and disappear. Sarah's stomach dropped. After finally finding what Theodore had hidden, she'd led Victor Kane straight to it. No, she grabbed Henry's arm. Turn around. Are you crazy? They'll kill us. I don't care. That automaton is mine, my inheritance, the only thing I have left of my family. Tears streamed down her face. Turn around, Henry, please. Henry pulled the truck to the side of the road. For a long moment he stared at her, his weathered face unreadable. Your great-uncle would be proud of you, he said finally, stubborn as a mule and twice as brave. Does that mean you'll help me? It means we need a plan. Kane has men, money, power. We have nothing. We have the truth. Truth doesn't mean much against bullets. Sarah wiped her eyes, forcing herself to think. Rosie May said folks in Millbrook don't trust outsiders. Kane can't just take the automaton and drive away. Someone will notice. Even if they do, what can they do about it? Call the police, file a report, make noise. Sarah's mind raced. Kane has spent 30 years keeping this quiet. He doesn't want attention. If we make enough noise, make this public. He'll have to back off. At least long enough for us to figure out something better. Henry nodded slowly. Rosie May has connections. Church folks, town council people who remember your great-uncle. He put the truck in gear. Let's go make some noise. They reached Rosie's kitchen as the sun was setting. The diner was filled with the dinner crowd, mostly locals finishing their workday. Rosie May took one look at Sarah's tear-streaked face and locked the front door. Back room, now, both of you. In the private dining area, Sarah told her everything. The hidden room, the automaton, Victor Kane's threats. Rosie May listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, the older woman picked up her phone. Pastor Williams, it's Rosie. I need you to make some calls. Yes, it's urgent. No, it can't wait. She hung up and dialed again. Tom, get down to Mitchell's warehouse right now. Bring your camera. There's some city folks trying to steal Theo's property, and I want it documented. Another call. Sheriff Patterson, this is Rosie May Johnson. I'm reporting a breaking and entering at the old Mitchell workshop. Armed men. Yes, I'm sure. Send someone now. Within an hour, there were a dozen people gathered at the warehouse. The sheriff's car blocked the driveway. Tom Harris, owner of the hardware store and amateur photographer, was snapping pictures of the black sedan still parked by the building, and Victor Kane was furious. Sarah watched from the safety of Rosie May's car as Kane argued with Sheriff Patterson. She couldn't hear the words, but Kane's body language told the story. He gestured emphatically, his silver hair catching the glow of the emergency lights. The sheriff crossed his arms, unmoved. He can't just take it now, Henry said. Too many witnesses. But he'll be back. Probably tonight after everyone leaves. Sarah shook her head. Then we don't leave. We stay here and watch. Child, you can't sleep in your car again. Not in your condition. I'm not letting him take what's mine. Rosie May returned to the car, her expression grim. Sheriff told them to leave. Said they can't prove they have any right to be here, and until they do, they're trespassing. What did Kane say? Said he'd be back with lawyers and paperwork. Said this wasn't over. Rosie May's eyes met Sarah's. He's right about that. This is just the beginning. Kane's sedan pulled away. Sarah watched until the taillights disappeared, then got out of the car. Where are you going? Henry asked. To secure my property. The sheriff had left a deputy to watch the warehouse overnight. Sarah introduced herself, explained the situation, got permission to enter. With Henry and Rosie May accompanying her, she descended back into the hidden room. The composer's Muse was still there, untouched, waiting. Thank God, Sarah breathed. We need to move her, Henry said. Somewhere Kane can't find her. Where? My farmhouse has a cellar, properly climate-controlled. I restored antiques there for years after Theo closed the shop. They worked quickly, carefully. The automaton was heavier than she looked, requiring all three of them to carry her up the stairs and out to Henry's truck. They wrapped her in blankets, secured her in the truck bed, drove to the farmhouse with their headlights off. The cellar was exactly as Henry had described. Clean, climate-controlled. He looked perfect for storing something precious. She'll be safe here, Henry said, at least for now. Sarah touched the automaton's porcelain face. My great-uncle spent 30 years protecting you. I'm not going to let him down. It was past midnight when they finished. Rosie May insisted Sarah stay at her house above the diner in a proper bed with proper food. Too exhausted to argue, Sarah agreed. She dreamed of Derek that night. They were standing in the warehouse surrounded by Theodore's abandoned projects. Derek was holding their baby, a little girl with his crooked smile and Sarah's stubborn chin. You're doing good, he told her. I'm proud of you. I'm scared. I know, but you're not alone. He kissed her forehead, the touch achingly real. Trust the people around you. They'll help. I miss you so much. I know that too. His image began to fade. Take care of our girl Sarah. And don't let the bastards win. She woke with tears on her pillow and Derek's name on her lips. 3 days passed. Victor Kane didn't return, but his lawyers did. They showed up at this county courthouse with stacks of documents claiming that Theodore Mitchell had obtained the automaton fraudulently, that the true owners were the Hartley estate, that Sarah was in possession of stolen property. The clerk called Sarah immediately. They're filing motions, trying to get a court order to seize the automaton and freeze your assets. What assets? I have $96. They don't know that, but honey, you need a lawyer, a good one. Sarah didn't have money for a lawyer, didn't have money for anything, but Rosie May's niece in Philadelphia did. Patricia Johnson arrived 2 days later driving a sensible sedan and carrying a briefcase that had seen real courtrooms. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and method no nonsense with Rosie May's same direct manner. Show me everything, she said. The documents, the automaton, all of it. Sarah did. Patricia spent 3 hours reviewing the paperwork Theodore had left behind. When she emerged from Henry's guest room, where she'd spread documents across every surface, her expression was carefully neutral. Well, Sarah demanded. The good news is your great-uncle's documentation is solid. Edmund Hartley signed over ownership of the automaton clearly and legally. The transfer is airtight. And the bad news? Victor Kane has deep pockets and no ethics. He'll tie you up in court for years. Depositions, motions, appeals. Even if you win, you'll be bankrupt. Sarah sank into a chair. So I can't win. I didn't say that. Patricia sat across from her. Kane wants this quiet. He's spent 30 years keeping the automaton's existence secret. If this goes public, really public, it becomes much harder for him to operate. Public? How? Museums, academics, media. Patricia leaned forward. The composer's Muse isn't just valuable, she's historically significant, a lost masterpiece by one of the greatest automaton makers in history. If we can get authentication from respected experts, if we can make this a story about cultural heritage instead of property disputes, Kane loses his leverage. Exactly. He can't steal something the whole world is watching. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. How do we do that? I have a colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She specializes in antique automata. If she authenticates the composer's Muse, her word carries weight. Can you contact her? Already did. She's coming tomorrow. Dr. Elizabeth Chen was not what Sarah expected. Small and energetic with paint-stained fingers and an infectious enthusiasm, she approached the automaton like a pilgrim approaching a holy relic. Oh my God, she whispered, circling the figure. It's real. It's really real. You can tell just by looking. The proportions, the materials, the style. Dr. Chen's voice trembled with excitement. This is Henri Maillardet's work. I'd stake my career on it. She spent 4 hours examining every detail, photographing, measuring, making notes in a leather-bound journal. When she finally stepped back, her face was glowing. This is the find of a lifetime. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and your great-uncle's restoration... She shook her head in amazement. He was a master. This automaton is in better condition than when she was originally made. What's it worth? 25 million, maybe 30. Dr. Chen met Sarah's eyes. But more importantly, it belongs in a museum. Something this significant should be seen, studied, appreciated. I'm not selling to Victor Kane. I'm not suggesting you should, but there are options. Major museums would pay fair market value, or you could loan her out, retain ownership while letting the public experience her. Sarah thought about it. $25 million. Enough to pay every bill, buy a house, secure her baby's future. Enough to never worry about money again. But it wasn't about money. It had never been about money. Before I decide anything, she said slowly, I need to deal with Victor Kane. Dr. Chen exchanged glances with Patricia. What do you mean? Kane didn't just try to steal this automaton, he destroyed my family, my father, my mother, my husband. Sarah's voice hardened. I want him to pay for what he's done. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What your husband? Kane's man mentioned it, said Derek's death wasn't an accident. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I'm going to find it. The search for proof began with Theodore's records. Sarah had found most of the documentation, but there were gaps, missing files, references to correspondence that didn't exist in the folders she'd discovered. Theo was paranoid, Henry said when she mentioned it. He wouldn't have kept everything in one place. Then where's the rest? Maybe at the bank. He had a safe deposit box, paid for it decades in advance. The bank was a small brick building on Millbrook's main street. The manager, a portly man named Mr. Hendricks, confirmed that Theodore had indeed maintained a safe deposit box. Paid through 2025, he said, consulting his records. But I can't let you access it without proper documentation. Patricia produced the inheritance paperwork. Mr. Hendricks examined it, made a phone call to the probate attorney, and finally nodded. Everything seems to be in order. Follow me. The safe deposit box was larger than Sarah expected. Inside, she found more documents, more photographs, and something that made her heart stop. A recording device. Old-fashioned a cassette tape with a label in Theodore's handwriting. Insurance. October 1993. They played it in Henry's farmhouse, gathered around an old cassette player Rosie May had dug out of her storage closet. The tape hissed for a moment, then a voice emerged. Smooth, cultured, familiar. Victor Kane's voice. Mr. Mitchell. I'm losing patience. The Hartley estate has legitimate claims to that automaton. Theodore's voice older but firm. Edmund Hartley signed over ownership. The documentation is clear. Documentation can be disputed. Signatures can be questioned. Then question them in court. A pause. When Kane spoke again, his voice had lost its pleasant tone. You're making a mistake. I've destroyed better men than you, more powerful men. Do you know what happened to Edmund Hartley? He didn't just die, Mr. Mitchell. He died conveniently, right before he could transfer additional assets out of my reach. Sarah's blood went cold. Kane had just admitted to murder, on tape. Is that a threat? Theodore's voice was steady. It's a statement of fact. I get what I want, Mr. Mitchell, one way or another. If you won't cooperate, there are other ways. You have a niece in Pittsburgh, a sister in Ohio. Family can be such a vulnerability. The recording ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Patricia picked up her phone. I'm calling the FBI. The federal agents arrived from Philadelphia 3 days later. 2 men, 2 women badges, and serious expressions. They listened to the tape, reviewed the documents, interviewed Sarah for 4 hours. This is significant, the lead agent, a woman named Rodriguez, said finally. Kane's been on our radar for years. Art theft fraud suspected involvement in at least 3 deaths. But we've never been able to make anything stick. This tape has him admitting to killing Edmund Hartley. It suggests involvement. It's not a confession. Rodriguez leaned forward. But combined with other evidence we've gathered, it might be enough for an indictment. We'll need your cooperation, Mrs. Mitchell. You have it, whatever you need. This won't be quick or easy. Kane has money lawyers' connections. He'll fight. I don't care how long it takes. Sarah met the agent's eyes. That man killed my family, all of them. I want him in prison. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Then let's get started. The days that followed blurred together. FBI interviews, legal consultations, media inquiries. Dr. Chen had published a preliminary paper about the composer's Muse, and suddenly the story was everywhere. Lost automaton found in rural Pennsylvania. Widow discovers $1 million treasure in inherited warehouse. The hunt for the composer's Muse. Victor Kane's name appeared in several articles, always accompanied by words like alleged and disputed claims. His lawyers issued statements. His PR team worked overtime, but the attention was exactly what Patricia had predicted. He couldn't operate in shadows when the whole world was watching. 2 weeks after the FBI got involved, Sarah was awakened by her phone at 3 a.m. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Agent Rodriguez. Victor Kane has been arrested. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding. What? We moved tonight. Arrested Kane and 6 associates on charges including fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Rodriguez's voice carried an unfamiliar warmth. It's not over. The trial will take months. But he's in custody and he's not getting out. Sarah started to cry. Mrs. Mitchell, are you all right? I'm fine. She wiped her eyes, laughing and sobbing at the same time. "I'm better than fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank your great uncle. That tape was the key to everything." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of Rosie May's guest room, her hand on her belly, her mind racing through everything that had happened. Theodore Mitchell had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, recording Kane's threats, hiding the evidence, waiting for someone from his family to find it. "Blood will find blood," he'd written. He'd been right. The baby kicked hard and insistent. "I know," Sarah whispered. "We did it. We actually did it." But as she sat there in the dark, she realized it wasn't over. Not really. Kane was in custody, but there were still questions. Still mysteries. Like who had really killed Derek? Kane's arrest had mentioned conspiracy to commit murder, but the charges focused on Edmund Hartley and other historical victims. Derek's death hadn't been mentioned. Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Agent Rodriguez's number. "One more thing," she typed in a text message. "My husband, Derek Mitchell, died in a construction accident 4 months ago. I have reason to believe Victor Kane was involved." The response came 30 seconds later. "We're looking into it. I'll be in touch." Sarah lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside the window, the first hints of dawn were painting the skyline. In a few hours, she'd have to face another day of questions and decisions. But for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Victor Kane was behind bars. The automaton was safe. And somewhere in the investigation that was just beginning, there might be answers about Derek's death. She wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. But for the first time since that terrible night, when police officers had knocked on her door, Sarah Mitchell believed she might actually win. The trial of Victor Kane began in federal court 3 months later. By then, Sarah had given birth. A girl 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy and perfect. She named her Hope after the feeling that had carried her through the darkest days. And Teresa after the great uncle who had never met her, but had changed her life forever. Hope, Teresa Mitchell, entered the world screaming, and her mother thought it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The courtroom was packed on the day Sarah testified. Media spectators, Kane's supporters and detractors. Kane himself sat at the defense table, his silver hair perfectly groomed. His expression betraying nothing. But when Sarah took the stand, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. "Mrs. Mitchell," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Sarah told them everything, her father's business, her mother's death, the inheritance, the midnight encounter in the warehouse, the tape recording, and then she told them about Derek. 2 weeks after Victor Kane's arrest, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "The FBI informed me that they had found evidence linking Mr. Kane to my husband's death. A payment to a man named Marcus Webb, the same man who was with Kane in the warehouse that night. Webb confessed to tampering with my husband's safety equipment." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Kane's lawyers objected, but the damage was done. When the verdict came, Sarah was sitting in the front row, Hope asleep in her arms. Guilty on all counts. Victor Kane would spend the rest of his life in prison. As the bailiffs led him away, Kane turned and looked directly at Sarah. His expression was pure hatred, undisguised and venomous. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "That's for my father," she whispered. "For my mother, for Derek, for everyone you ever hurt." Kane looked away first, and Sarah Mitchell, widow and mother and survivor, finally allowed herself to breathe. The story should have ended there. The villain defeated the treasure, secured justice served. But Sarah had learned that life rarely offered such clean conclusions. There were still decisions to make. The composer's Muse was safe in Henry's cellar, but she couldn't stay there forever. Museums were calling, collectors were offering, the world wanted to see the automaton that had cost so many lives. Sarah thought about it for weeks. Consulted with Patricia, with Dr. Chen, with Henry and Rosie May. Prayed over it if she was being honest. And in the end, she made her choice. She wouldn't sell the automaton, wouldn't hide her away, wouldn't let her gather dust in a private collection. The composer's Muse would stay in Millbrook, in a museum built on Theodore's property, free for anyone to see. The Mitchell Foundation would fund it all. Education programs, scholarships for young craftspeople, support for widows and single mothers in crisis. Everything Victor Kane had tried to steal would be given away instead. When Sarah announced her decision at a press conference, the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Volunteers emerged. The little town of Millbrook became famous for something other than its main street and its diner. Henry Blackwood agreed to direct the museum's craftsmanship program, training a new generation in the skills Theodore had taught him. Rosie May's kitchen became the unofficial headquarters of the operation, her back room hosting countless planning meetings over coffee and pie. And Sarah Mitchell, who had arrived in Millbrook with nothing but a car full of belongings and a baby on the way, found something she'd thought she'd lost forever. A home, a community, a purpose. 1 year later, she stood on the steps of the newly opened Mitchell Workshop and Museum Hope, balanced on her hip, watching visitors stream through the doors. The automaton played 3 times a day now. Each performance drew gasps and tears and applause. Schoolchildren pressed their faces against the glass, watching the mechanical woman's fingers dance across the tiny keyboard. "You did good, Theo," Sarah murmured, thinking of the great uncle she'd never met. "Wherever you are, I hope you're proud." Henry appeared beside her, a cup of coffee in each hand. Full house again. "Good?" Sarah accepted the coffee with her free hand. "That's the whole point. Your daughter's going to grow up in this place, surrounded by all this history." "That's the plan." Sarah kissed Hope's forehead. "She's going to know where she came from, what her family sacrificed, what really matters." Henry was quiet for a moment. "What does really matter after everything you've been through?" Sarah thought about it. About Derek, who had dreamed of building a life with her. About Theodore, who had spent 30 years protecting something beautiful. About Victor Kane, who had destroyed so many lives in pursuit of things that didn't belong to him. "This, she said finally. "Right here. Sharing what we have instead of hoarding it. Building something that lasts." "That's a good answer." "It's the only answer that makes sense." The sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the museum, the automaton began to play her melody, drifting through the open doors. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, and somewhere she was certain Derek was listening too. The piece lasted exactly 17 days. Sarah was feeding Hope in the small apartment above Rosie's kitchen when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Kane may be in prison, but his network isn't. Watch your back, Mrs. Mitchell." Her hands went cold. Hope fussed at the sudden tension, and Sarah forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Shh, baby girl, it's okay. Mommy's right here." But it wasn't okay, not even close. She called Patricia immediately. "Forward me the message," the lawyer said, her voice tight. "And don't go anywhere alone." Who would send this Kane's in federal custody? He ran an organization, Sarah. People with money connections, grudges. Just because the head is cut off doesn't mean the body stops moving. Sarah looked down at her daughter, peacefully nursing, oblivious to the danger that had just crashed back into their lives. 17 days of believing it was over. 17 days of letting herself relax. She should have known better. That afternoon, Agent Rodriguez arrived in Millbrook. The FBI agent looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her usual crisp demeanor frayed at the edges. "We've been monitoring Kane's communications from prison," Rodriguez said, spreading documents across Rosie May's back table. "He's been reaching out to associates, people we didn't catch in the initial sweep." "What kind of associates?" "The dangerous kind." Rodriguez pulled out a photograph. A man in his 40s, hard-faced, with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. "Marcus Webb's brother, Thomas. He blames you for Marcus being in prison." Sarah stared at the photograph. Marcus Webb was the man who had killed Derek, the man who had confessed to tampering with the safety equipment, and now his brother wanted revenge. "Where is he?" "We don't know. He disappeared 3 days ago. Liquidated his assets, abandoned his apartment." Rodriguez met Sarah's eyes. "We have reason to believe he's heading this way." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Hope? We're assigning protective detail, 2 agents round the clock until we locate Webb. And if you don't locate him..." Rodriguez didn't answer. She didn't have to. The next week was a nightmare of looking over her shoulder. Sarah moved out of the apartment above the diner and into Henry's farmhouse, where the cellar still held the automaton and the doors had better locks. Federal agents rotated in shifts, their presence a constant reminder of the threat. Hope seemed to sense her mother's fear. She cried more, slept less, clung to Sarah with a desperation that broke her heart. "You need to rest," Rosie May said, arriving with groceries and casseroles. "You're running on empty." "I can't rest, not until they find him." "Then you'll collapse, and what good will that do your daughter?" Sarah knew Rosie May was right. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas Webb's scarred face, saw him standing over Hope's crib, saw everything she'd fought for being ripped away. On the 8th night, Sarah was dozing in a chair by Hope's bassinet when her phone rang, Henry's voice urgent and scared. "Someone's at the warehouse." "What?" "I drove by on my way home. There's a light inside, moving around." Sarah was already reaching for her coat. Call 911. I'm on my way. Sarah, no. Wait for the agents. But Sarah was already out the door. The federal agents were supposed to be watching her. They'd set up in a car across from Henry's driveway, taking turns sleeping. But when Sarah burst outside, the car was empty. She didn't have time to wonder why. She grabbed Henry's spare keys from the hook by the door and ran for his truck. The drive to the warehouse took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of her heart pounding, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The museum was supposed to open in 3 weeks. All of Theodore's equipment was still inside, waiting to be organized and displayed. And someone was in there. Someone who shouldn't be. Sarah pulled up to the gate and killed the headlights. The warehouse was dark except for a faint glow from the second floor. A window that should have been boarded was open. She should call for backup, should wait for the police, should do anything except what she was about to do, but this was her inheritance, her great-uncle's legacy, the thing Derek had died protecting even if he hadn't known it. She wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. Sarah slipped through the gate and approached the building. The side door she'd used so many times before stood ajar, its lock broken. Inside, she could hear movement above her. Footsteps, the scrape of furniture being moved. She climbed the stairs slowly, her phone clutched in one hand, ready to dial 911 at the first sign of real danger. The second floor was used for storage, now boxes of Theodore's papers and personal effects waiting to be cataloged. The footsteps had stopped. Sarah reached the top of the stairs and froze. Thomas Webb stood in the middle of the room, a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other. He was bigger than his brother, meaner looking, with that scar twisting his face into something inhuman. Mrs. Mitchell. His voice was flat, emotionless. I've been waiting for you. The police are on their way. No, they're not. Your Fed friends are taking a little nap in their car. Nothing permanent, just some chemicals in their coffee. He gestured with the gun. Come in, we need to talk. Sarah didn't move. What do you want? What do I want? Webb laughed, but there was no humor in it. I want my brother back. I want Victor Kane walking free. I want to turn back time and make sure you never found that damned automaton. I can't give you any of those things. No, but you can give me something else. Webb took a step closer. The evidence. The tape, the documents, everything your uncle hid. You're going to help me destroy it all. The FBI has copies. It's too late. Maybe, but without the originals, Kane's lawyers can claim tampering, contaminated evidence. It won't get him released, but it might get him a new trial. And this time, we'll be ready. Sarah's mind raced. Keep him talking. Buy time. Someone would notice the agents were down. Someone would come. Why do you care so much about Kane? He's just a businessman. Webb's expression flickered. He's family. What? Victor Kane is my father. Mine and Marcus's. Different mothers, same piece of garbage dad who abandoned us both. Webb's voice turned bitter. But he came back when we were useful. Gave us jobs, money, purpose. And now he's rotting in a cell because of you. Victor Kane had children. Sons who had grown up to be killers. He used you, Sarah said. Just like he uses everyone. Maybe, but he's still blood. Webb raised the gun. And blood is all that matters. Sarah heard the shot before she registered the pain. It came from behind her, a deafening crack that made her ears ring and her legs buckle, but the pain she was bracing for never arrived. Thomas Webb stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. Sarah spun around. Henry Blackwood stood at the top of the stairs, a hunting rifle in his hand, his weathered face hard as stone. Get away from her, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. Webb was on the ground now, cursing, blood seeping between his fingers. Henry kicked the gun away and kept the rifle trained on Kane's son. Sarah, call 911, now. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, but she managed to dial, managed to give the address, managed to say the words, man shot, need ambulance and police. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed against the wall. It was over in minutes. Police cars, ambulances, federal agents who had been revived from their drugged sleep. Thomas Webb was loaded into an ambulance, still cursing, still threatening revenge. Sarah sat on the warehouse steps, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching the chaos unfold. Henry sat beside her, the rifle now confiscated by police, his hands steady despite everything. How did you know, she asked. Know what, Mum? That I'd gone alone, that I'd need help. Henry was quiet for a moment. Your uncle used to say the same thing about you Mitchells. Stubborn as mules and twice as brave. He shook his head. I knew you'd come here the second I told you about the light, so I grabbed my gun and followed. You could have been killed. So could you. But here we are. He looked at her, his eyes soft. Family looks after family, Sarah. That's what Theo would have wanted. Sarah's throat tightened. Family. She'd spent so long thinking she didn't have any left. But family wasn't just blood. It was the people who showed up when you needed them. The people who risked everything to keep you safe. Thank you, she whispered. Henry nodded once, then looked away. But not before Sarah saw the tears glistening in his eyes. Thomas Webb survived. He was transferred to federal custody the moment he was stable enough to be moved, charged with attempted murder assault on federal agents and conspiracy. Victor Kane's network was finally truly dismantled. But for Sarah, the real aftermath came in the quiet moments. The nightmares that jolted her awake at 3 a.m. The way she flinched at unexpected sounds. The panic that gripped her every time hope was out of her sight. It's PTSD, Dr. Chen said gently, having driven up from Philadelphia when she heard what happened. After everything you've been through, it would be strange if you didn't have some trauma responses. I can't afford to fall apart. Hope needs me. Then get help. There's no shame in therapy, Sarah. In fact, it's the bravest thing you can do. Sarah started seeing a counselor in Lancaster, driving out twice a week while Rosie May watched Hope. It helped slowly. The nightmares didn't stop, but they became less frequent. The panic attacks came with warning signs she learned to recognize. And through it all, the museum preparation continued. The grand opening was pushed back a month to allow for security upgrades. Metal detectors at the entrance, cameras everywhere. A panic room built into the basement where the automaton's climate-controlled vault was housed. Overkill, Patricia declared, reviewing the security plans. But justified overkill. I'm not taking any more chances. The opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Spring had come to Millbrook, softening the landscape and bringing tourists to the small-town streets. Pre-registration for the museum had already exceeded expectations. 2 days before the opening, Sarah was reviewing final arrangements when Agent Rodriguez called. We found something in Kane's prison communications, something I think you should see. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you come to Philadelphia? Sarah arranged for Rosie May to watch Hope and drove the 3 hours to the FBI field office. Rodriguez met her in a conference room alone, looking even more tired than the last time they'd met. What's going on? Sarah asked. Rodriguez slid a folder across the table. Kane has been talking about you a lot, mostly hatred-revenge fantasies the usual, but last week he said something different. Sarah opened the folder. It contained a transcript of a recorded conversation between Kane and his lawyer. One passage was highlighted in yellow. The Mitchell woman thinks she knows everything, but she doesn't know about Eleanor. She doesn't know what her precious great-uncle really did. Sarah looked up. Who's Eleanor? Theodore's wife. She died in 1992, about a year before he closed his business. I know, Henry mentioned her. Did he mention how she died? Sarah's stomach tightened. No. Rodriguez pulled out another document, a death certificate. Eleanor Marie Mitchell, deceased February 3, 1992. Cause of death, suicide. According to official records, she took her own life. Pills. No note was ever found. Rodriguez's voice was careful, measured. But we started digging, found some old police reports, hospital records, things that didn't quite add up. What are you saying? I'm saying Eleanor Mitchell didn't kill herself. She was murdered. Rodriguez met Sarah's eyes. And according to Kane, your great-uncle knew who did it. That's why he really hid the automaton, not just to protect it from theft, to protect evidence. Sarah felt the room spin. Evidence of what? We don't know yet, but Kane seems to think there's something hidden inside the automaton itself, something Theodore put there, something that could expose more than just art theft. Inside the automaton. Sarah thought about the composer's Muse sitting in her climate-controlled vault, waiting for her public debut. She thought about all the times she'd watched the mechanical woman play, marveling at the craftsmanship, never imagining there might be more hidden within. I need to get back to Millbrook. Sarah, wait. We should handle this officially. Bring in experts who can examine the automaton without damaging it. There's no time. The opening is in 2 days. If Kane's people have any associates we don't know about, they might try something. All the more reason to let professionals handle it. But Sarah was already heading for the door. Call Dr. Chen. Tell her to meet me at the museum. And Rodriguez? Thank you for telling me the truth. She drove back to Millbrook in a daze, her mind churning through possibilities. Eleanor Mitchell murdered. Theodore knowing the truth. Evidence hidden inside the automaton for 30 years. What else had her great-uncle been protecting? She arrived at the museum just as the sun was setting. Henry was there overseeing final preparations, and his face fell when he saw her expression. What happened? Sarah told him everything. The transcript, Eleanor's death, Kane's claims about hidden evidence. Henry went pale. Eleanor was murdered, but Theo said... He said she was sick, depressed, that she couldn't go on. That's what everyone was supposed to think, but there's more to the story. Sarah headed for the basement stairs. Help me open the vault. The climate-controlled room was exactly as they'd left it, the composer's muse sitting on her pedestal, serene and beautiful. Sarah approached slowly, studying the automaton with new eyes. Dr. Chen examined her thoroughly, Henry said. She would have noticed if something was hidden inside. Maybe, or maybe she wasn't looking for it. Sarah knelt beside the figure examining the base. Theodore was a genius with mechanisms. If he hid something, he would have made it invisible to casual inspection. She ran her fingers along the edges of the harpsichord, feeling for seams for inconsistencies. Nothing. She checked the figure's back, her arms, her elaborate gown. Nothing. It could be anywhere, Henry said, or nowhere. Kane could be lying. He's not lying. He wants this too badly. Sarah sat back on her heels thinking. Theodore had created puzzles within puzzles. The music box that opened the trapdoor. The key hidden in another puzzle box. Everything requiring multiple steps, specific knowledge. The music, she said suddenly. What? Theodore used the music box melody as a trigger. What if there's something similar here? What if the automaton has to play a specific piece to reveal the hiding place? She only plays one piece, the Bach invention. That we know of, but Theo restored her. He could have added additional programming. Sarah found the winding mechanism and turned it carefully. The automaton came to life, her fingers dancing across the keys, playing the familiar Bach piece. When she finished, Sarah wound her again. The same piece played. Try the music box, Henry suggested, the one that opened the trapdoor. Sarah ran upstairs and retrieved the small music box from the display case where it now resided. She brought it back to the vault and wound it, letting its melody fill the space. As the last notes faded, she wound the automaton again. This time, something different happened. The composer's muse played the Bach invention, but when she finished, instead of stopping, her hands shifted position. A new melody began slower and sadder, a piece Sarah didn't recognize. And as she played, a small panel in the harpsichord's side slid open. My God, Henry breathed. Sarah reached into the hidden compartment and withdrew a bundle of papers, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. And beneath them, a small device she recognized instantly. A tape recorder, just like the one they'd found in the bank vault. He made a second recording, Sarah said. Whatever this is, it was important enough to hide inside his greatest work. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. Theodore's voice filled the vault older than on the first tape shakier. If you're hearing this, then you've solved my final puzzle. The evidence you need is in these papers. Photographs, documents proof of what really happened to Eleanor. Sarah's throat tightened. My wife didn't kill herself. She was murdered by Edmund Hartley, the same man who commissioned me to restore the composer's muse. He was having an affair with her, and when she tried to end it, when she threatened to tell me the truth, he killed her and made it look like suicide. Henry sat down heavily on a nearby chair, his face ashen. I discovered the truth after Hartley's death. Found letters in his effects when I was completing the restoration. Letters that proved everything. But by then, Hartley was already dead, and I had no one to bring to justice. Theodore's voice broke. I should have destroyed the automaton, should have burned everything and tried to forget. But I couldn't. The muse was Eleanor's favorite piece. She used to sit and watch me work on it for hours. Destroying it would have been like destroying the last piece of her. So instead, I hid the evidence, and I hid myself. Waited for the day when someone from my family might find it and finally tell the truth. Not for revenge, not for justice, but so Eleanor's memory wouldn't be stained by the lie of suicide. The recording clicked off. Sarah stood in silence, tears streaming down her face. Her great-uncle had spent 30 years carrying this burden. 30 years of grief and guilt and secrets, all to protect his wife's memory. Eleanor, Henry whispered, all this time and he never told anyone. He couldn't. Hartley was rich, powerful, connected. Who would have believed a small-town craftsman over a wealthy collector? Sarah looked at the papers in her hands. But now we have proof. Now we can tell the truth. The grand opening of the Mitchell Museum happened as scheduled, but with an unexpected addition. Alongside the displays of Theodore's work and the composer's Muse, there was now an exhibit dedicated to Eleanor Mitchell. Her photographs, her story. The truth about her death finally revealed after 3 decades. The media coverage was overwhelming, not just for the automaton, but for the woman whose murder had been covered up for so long. Edmund Hartley's remaining family issued statements of shock and condemnation. Historians revised their accounts. Eleanor Mitchell was no longer a suicide statistic. She was a victim who had finally been given justice. Sarah stood at the back of the crowded museum, hope in her arms, watching visitors move through the exhibits. Some wiped tears. Others stood transfixed before the automaton, watching her play the 2 pieces she was programmed for the Bach invention and the haunting melody that had unlocked her secrets. Rosie May appeared beside her dressed in her finest church clothes. "Your uncle would be proud." "I hope so. I hope I did right by him." "Child, you did more than right. You gave that man peace." Rosie May touched Hope's cheek gently. "And you gave this little one a legacy to grow into." Henry approached, looking uncomfortable in a suit he'd clearly borrowed. "There's someone here to see you, says she knew your great-grandmother." Sarah frowned. "Who? Her name's Margaret. Margaret Hartley." Sarah's blood ran cold. Hartley. As in Edmund Hartley. As in the man who had murdered Eleanor. "I don't want to see her." "She says she has something for you, tussle for you, something that belonged to Eleanor." Against her better judgment, Sarah handed Hope to Rosie May and followed Henry to a quiet corner of the museum. The woman waiting there was elderly, at least 80, with white hair and hands that trembled with age, but her eyes were sharp and filled with something that might have been remorse. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for seeing me. You're Edmund Hartley's what daughter niece?" "Widow." The word came out heavy with pain. "I married Edmund in 1985. He died in 1992. I knew nothing of his affair with Eleanor until your discovery made the news." Sarah said nothing. "I came to apologize. Not because I'm responsible for what Edmund did, but because I benefited from his crimes without knowing it. The money, the art, the status. All of it tainted by secrets I never suspected. What do you want from me?" Margaret reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box. "This belonged to Eleanor. Edmund kept it hidden in his study along with other things that now make terrible sense. I thought she should have it back." Sarah opened the box. Inside was a locket, gold and delicate, with a photograph inside. Theodore on one side, Eleanor on the other. Young, smiling in love. "Where did you find this?" "In a wall safe behind Edmund's portrait. I only discovered it last week when I was cleaning out the house to sell." Margaret's voice wavered. "There were letters too. I've given them to the FBI, but I wanted you to have the locket. It seems right that it should stay with family." Sarah stared at the photographs. Her great-grandparents frozen in a moment of happiness before everything went wrong. "Thank you," she said finally. "This means more than you know." Margaret nodded once, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of museum visitors. Sarah stood alone, holding the locket, feeling the weight of decades of secrets finally lifting. The truth was out. Eleanor was remembered. Theodore's work was preserved. And somehow impossibly, Sarah had found her way through. She walked back to where Rosie May stood with Hope and took her daughter back into her arms. The baby was sleeping now, peaceful and warm, unaware of all the pain and sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. "What was that about?" Rosie May asked. "Closure," Sarah said. "At least I hope so." She looked around the museum at the people admiring Theodore's work, at the automaton playing her eternal music, at the photographs of Eleanor that finally told her true story. This was what her great-uncle had wanted. Not just to hide a treasure, but to protect a truth. To wait for someone from his family who would understand, who would fight, who would finally set things right. Blood had found blood, and the truth had finally come home. That night after the museum closed and the visitors went home, Sarah sat alone in the vault with the composer's Muse. She wound the mechanism one last time, watching the automaton's delicate fingers move across the keys. "I didn't know you," she said softly. "Either of you. Theodore and Eleanor. But I feel like I understand you now. What you went through. What you sacrificed." The automaton played on her glass eyes, staring at something only she could see. "I'm going to take care of this place. Take care of your legacy. And I'm going to raise my daughter to know where she came from." Sarah touched the automaton's porcelain hand gently. "You're not alone anymore. None of us are." The last notes of the melody faded into silence. Sarah stood, wiped her eyes, and climbed the stairs back to the world above. Hope was waiting for her, held in Rosie May's arms, reaching toward her mother with chubby fingers. "Ready to go home?" Rosie May asked. Sarah took her daughter and held her close, breathing in the sweet baby scent, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest. "Yeah," she said, "I think we finally are." 3 months after the museum opened, Sarah received a letter that made her hands shake. The envelope bore no return address, only her name written in elegant cursive. Inside a single sheet of paper with words that turned her blood to ice. "Your husband didn't die by accident. Ask Victor Kane about Project Cleanup. The truth is closer than you think." Sarah read it 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had believed Derek's murder was solved. Marcus Webb had confessed. The case was closed. But this letter suggested otherwise. She called Agent Rodriguez immediately. "Project Cleanup." Rodriguez repeated, her voice sharp. "Where did you hear that name?" "An anonymous letter just arrived today." Silence on the line. Too long. Too heavy. "Rodriguez, what aren't you telling me? Come to Philadelphia. Tomorrow. There's something you need to see." Sarah drove to the FBI field office the next morning, leaving hope with Rosie May. The 3-hour drive felt endless, her mind churning through possibilities. Derek's face haunted her, his crooked smile the way he'd hold her after long days. She had thought she knew everything about his death. She had been wrong. Rodriguez met her in the same conference room as before, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in a rumpled suit sat at the table, files spread before him. "Sarah Mitchell, this is Detective Frank Morrison, Pittsburgh PD. He's been investigating something we think you should know about." Morrison stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes tired. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." "What circumstances? What is Project Cleanup?" Morrison exchanged glances with Rodriguez, then opened one of his files. Project Cleanup was Kane's insurance policy, a list of people who knew too much who posed threats to his operation. When Kane felt exposed, he activated the cleanup. People on that list started having accidents. Sarah's throat tightened. Derek was on that list, not exactly. Morrison pulled out a photograph. Sarah recognized it immediately. Theodore Mitchell. Younger, but unmistakably her great-uncle. "Your great-uncle was on that list. Has been for 30 years. Kane couldn't touch him directly because Theodore had hidden too well, prepared too carefully. So Kane did the next best thing." "What?" "He went after Theodore's family. Your grandmother died in a car accident in 1998. Your mother had a stroke in 2015. Both were ruled natural or accidental." Morrison's voice was gentle but relentless. "But when we cross-referenced Kane's communications, we found payments. Large payments to people with very specific skills." Sarah felt the room spinning. Her grandmother, her mother, not natural deaths, murders. And Derek. Derek was the final piece. Kane knew Theodore was dying, knew the property would pass to you. He wanted you isolated, desperate, easy to manipulate. Morrison closed the file. "Your husband wasn't just killed to get the automaton. He was killed to break you." Sarah stood so abruptly her chair crashed backward. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass, trying to breathe. Her entire family, every loss she'd ever suffered, all connected to Victor Kane. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Rodriguez answered. "We didn't have proof. Kane's communications were coded encrypted. It took months to break them down. And honestly, Mrs. Mitchell, we weren't sure how you'd handle it." "How I'd handle it?" Sarah spun around. Rage replacing grief. "You kept this from me. You let me think Derek's death was the end of it. You let me believe my family just had bad luck." "We were trying to protect you." "By lying to me," Rodriguez stood her ground. "By waiting until we had something solid, something that could actually be used in court. And now you do." "Now we do." Morrison pulled out another file. Kane kept records, detailed records, names, dates, amounts paid. He was paranoid about being betrayed by his own people, so he documented everything as leverage. "We found it all," Rodriguez added, "hidden in a storage unit under a fake name. The evidence links Kane to at least 7 deaths, including your grandmother, your mother, and your husband. 7 deaths. 7 lives erased because one man wanted to steal an automaton. What happens now? New charges, murder conspiracy, more counts than I can list." Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "Kane is never getting out, Sarah. We're going to make sure of that." Sarah should have felt satisfaction, relief, justice. Instead, she felt hollow. "I need to go home," she said. "I need to see my daughter." The drive back to Millbrook passed in a blur. Sarah couldn't remember the roads, the exits, the miles of highway. She could only think of her grandmother's funeral, which she'd attended as a teenager. her mother's stroke, which had come without warning, all those years of grief, all those tears she'd shed, and behind it all, Victor Kane pulling strings, destroying lives. When she pulled up to Henry's farmhouse, Rosie May was waiting on the porch, Hope in her arms. "What happened?" Rosie May asked the moment Sarah stepped out of the car. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have." Sarah took Hope from Rosie May's arms, holding her daughter so tightly the baby squirmed in protest. "I've seen a lot of ghosts." She told them everything. Henry by Rosie May Patricia, who had driven up when she heard Sarah was back. They sat in Henry's living room as the sun set, listening in horrified silence. "All of them," Henry said. When she finished, his voice barely a whisper. "Theodore's whole family, because of that monster." "Because of an automaton," Patricia corrected grimly. "Because Kane wanted something that wasn't his and was willing to kill anyone who got in the way." "What do we do now?" Rosie May asked. Sarah looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep in her arms, innocent and peaceful. "We make sure he pays, for all of it." The next weeks were consumed by legal proceedings. New depositions, new testimonies, new evidence submitted to the court. Kane's lawyers fought every step, claiming the evidence was fabricated, that their client was being framed. But the documentation was overwhelming. Kane's own paranoia had created the paper trail that would destroy him. Sarah testified again, this time about her grandmother and mother. She showed the court photographs, memories, the life that had been stolen from her family. She kept her voice steady even as her heart broke. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Victor Kane would receive multiple life sentences. He would die in prison alone, surrounded by concrete walls instead of the treasures he'd killed to possess. Sarah watched them lead him away, waiting to feel triumph. Instead, she felt empty. Justice couldn't bring back Derek, couldn't bring back her mother or grandmother, couldn't erase the decades of pain. But it could prevent Kane from hurting anyone else. That would have to be enough. Summer came to Millbrook, bringing tourists and warmth and new beginnings. The museum was thriving. Visitors came from across the country to see the composer's Muse, to hear her play, to learn the story of Theodore and Eleanor Mitchell. The education programs were fully enrolled. The scholarship fund had received donations exceeding expectations. And Sarah was learning to live again. She had moved out of Henry's farmhouse and into a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the museum to walk. Hope was crawling now, getting into everything, her personality emerging in stubborn determination that reminded Sarah achingly of Derek. "She's got his eyes," Rosie May observed, watching Hope chase a ball across Sarah's living room floor. "Same mischief in them. Same appetite, too. I swear she eats more than I do." "Growing babies need fuel." Rosie May scooped Hope up, making her giggle. "Speaking of which, there's someone here to see you. Says she's a reporter." Sarah frowned. She'd given enough interviews to last a lifetime. "I'm not really in the mood for media." "She's not from TV or newspapers. Says she's writing a book about your family, the whole story from Theodore to now." A book? Sarah hadn't considered that, but the story deserved to be told properly, not in fragments of news coverage and courtroom transcripts. "Send her in." The reporter's name was Catherine Wells, mid-30s with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses and a notebook that had clearly seen years of use. She shook Sarah's hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Mitchell. I know you must be exhausted by all the attention." "That's one word for it." "I'll be honest with you. I'm not interested in sensationalism. I'm interested in truth." Catherine sat across from Sarah, her notebook closed. "Your family's story isn't just about an automaton or a murderer. It's about legacy, about what people sacrifice to protect the things they love. And you want to write about that. I want to do it justice, but only with your cooperation, your blessing." Sarah studied the reporter for a long moment. Something about her felt genuine, trustworthy. "Why this story? There are plenty of scandals to write about." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She spent her whole life protecting a single photograph, the only picture of her family before the war. When she died, she left it to me with a note, 'Remember where we came from.'" She met Sarah's eyes. "Your great-uncle did the same thing. He protected something precious, not just for its value, but for its meaning. That's the story I want to tell." Sarah looked at Hope now, contentedly chewing on a wooden block in Rosie May's lap. The baby's future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. But that future was built on the past, on Theodore's sacrifice, on Derek's love, on generations of Mitchells who had fought for something greater than themselves. "Okay," Sarah said, "let's talk." Catherine Wells spent 3 weeks in Millbrook. She interviewed everyone: Sarah, Henry, Rosie May, Patricia. She visited the museum, examined the automaton, studied Theodore's journals and Eleanor's photographs. And she uncovered something no one expected. "I found a letter," Catherine said one evening, spreading papers across Sarah's kitchen table. "In the County Historical Society's archives. It was misfiled probably decades ago." The letter was dated 1991, addressed to Theodore Mitchell. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone ill or elderly. Sarah read it aloud. "Dear Mr. Mitchell, by the time you receive this, I will likely be dead. My doctors give me 3 months, perhaps less. But before I go, I must confess something that has haunted me for years. I am the reason your father lost his business in 1952. I was young, ambitious, jealous of his talent. I spread rumors, turned customers against him, drove him to bankruptcy. He died thinking he had failed. But he hadn't. I had destroyed him. I've spent my whole life trying to atone. When I learned of your skill, your reputation, I knew what I had to do. The composer's Muse was my family's most precious possession. By giving her to you, I hope to repay some small part of the debt I owed. You are the finest craftsman I have ever known. Finer than your father, and he was extraordinary. Take care of the Muse. She deserves someone worthy. With regret and admiration, Edmund Hartley." Sarah's hands trembled. Hartley destroyed Theodore's father, and then gave him the automaton as atonement. "It explains so much," Catherine said. "Why Hartley trusted Theodore with something so valuable, why he transferred ownership instead of just commissioning a restoration, and why Theodore felt he couldn't destroy it even after he learned Hartley killed Eleanor." Henry's voice was thick with emotion. "The automaton represented redemption, his father's legacy restored." "There's more," Catherine said. She pulled out another document. "I tracked down Hartley's medical records. He was dying of cancer when he gave Theodore the automaton, but the timeline doesn't work." "What do you mean?" "Hartley was supposed to die within 3 months of that letter, but he lived another full year, long enough to have an affair with Eleanor, long enough to kill her when she tried to end it." Sarah stared at the dates, the pieces clicking into place. His guilt gave him false courage. He thought he was dying, so he confessed everything. But then he didn't die. And he couldn't face what he'd done, so he started an affair to distract himself, and when that went wrong... Catherine didn't need to finish the sentence. The tragedy kept unfolding layer after layer, a chain of guilt and consequences stretching back decades. "Can we put this in the book?" Sarah asked. "With your permission, it's important context. It shows that your great-uncle wasn't just protecting an object. He was protecting a complicated legacy, one that was tied to his father, to Hartley, to Eleanor. Everything connected." Sarah nodded slowly. "Tell the whole truth. That's what Theodore would have wanted." The book took Catherine 18 months to write. During that time, life in Millbrook continued. Hope took her first steps at 10 months, toddling across the museum floor while visitors cheered and Sarah cried. Henry was diagnosed with prostate cancer, fought it with the same stubborn determination he'd shown in everything else, and emerged cancer-free after 6 months of treatment. Rosie May celebrated her 45th year running the diner, surrounded by generations of customers who had grown up on her cooking, and Sarah fell in love. His name was James Cooper, a history professor from Penn State who had come to study the automaton and ended up staying for the woman who owned it. He was quiet, bookish, nothing like Derek. But he made Sarah laugh, challenged her intellectually adored Hope as if she were his own. "I'm not trying to replace him, thus," James said one evening as they sat on Sarah's porch watching fireflies dance across the yard. "I know I never could." "I know," Sarah reached for his hand. "Derek would have liked you. He always said I needed someone who could keep up with me. Can I keep up with you?" "You're doing okay so far." James proposed on Hope's 2nd birthday. A simple ring, nothing flashy, presented while Hope smashed cake into her face and the entire town watched. Sarah said yes. The wedding was held at the museum in front of the composer's Muse. Henry walked Sarah down the aisle. Rosie May catered. Hope served as flower girl, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. And somewhere Sarah was certain Derek was smiling. Catherine's book was published the following spring. The Composer's Legacy, a story of art, murder, and redemption. It became a bestseller within weeks. The publicity brought a new wave of visitors to Millbrook. Documentary filmmakers, scholars, curious tourists who had read the book and wanted to see the automaton for themselves. And one visitor Sarah never expected. The man was in his 70s, thin and stooped, with hands that shook as he approached the museum's front desk. "I'd like to see Mrs. Cooper," he said. "Please tell her it's Edward Hartley, Edmund's nephew." Sarah received the message with trepidation. She'd already met Margaret Edmund's widow. She'd hoped that chapter was closed, but she agreed to see him. Edward Hartley waited in her office, perched on the edge of a chair, looking like he might bolt at any moment. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said as Sarah entered. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you." "What do you want?" "To apologize, and to give you something." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet bag. "This was my grandmother's, Edmund's mother. When she died, it passed to me, but after reading Ms. Wells' book, I realized it doesn't belong with the Hartleys anymore." Sarah opened the bag and gasped. A necklace spilled into her palm. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in an elaborate pattern, clearly antique, clearly valuable. "My grandmother wore this to the Russian imperial court," Edward said. "Before the revolution, before everything changed. She always said it was her most precious possession, more precious than any automaton. Why give it to me? Because my family owes yours a debt we can never repay. Uncle Edmund destroyed your great-great-grandfather's business. He murdered Eleanor Mitchell. He set in motion decades of tragedy." Edward's voice cracked. "This necklace is worth a fortune, but that's not why I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to you because it should belong to someone good, someone who will use it for something that matters." Sarah looked at the necklace, then at the old man before her. He wasn't responsible for his uncle's crimes. He was just trying to make amends in the only way he knew how. "The museum has an education fund," she said finally. "We use it for scholarships, programs for underprivileged children. If I sold this necklace, it would help a lot of people." "Yes." Edward nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Then that's what you should do. Eleanor and Theodore would have wanted that, I think, to turn something painful into something healing." Sarah extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley, for your honesty and your generosity." He shook it, then turned and walked away, his shoulders a little straighter than when he'd arrived. The necklace sold at auction for $2.3 million. Every penny went to the Mitchell Foundation's education fund, scholarships for first-generation college students, art programs for rural schools, apprenticeships for young craftspeople learning traditional skills, Theodore's legacy growing wider every year. On Hope's 5th birthday, Sarah stood in the museum after closing, watching her daughter press her face against the glass that protected the composer's muse. "She's beautiful, Mommy." "She is." Did great-great-uncle Theodore really make her play music? He restored her, fixed all the broken parts, and made her perfect again. Hope considered this seriously. "Like you fixed our family." Sarah's throat tightened. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy James said you took all the broken pieces and made something beautiful." Hope turned to look at her mother with Derek's eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin. "He said that's what makes you special." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a hug. "I didn't do it alone. I had lots of help. From Granny Rosie and Uncle Henry and Daddy James. And from people who aren't here anymore. My parents, Derek, your first daddy, Theodore and Eleanor, they all helped even when I couldn't see them." Hope nodded as if this made perfect sense. "The lady in the glass, Bart," she said, pointing at the automaton. "She's helping too, isn't she?" Sarah looked at the composer's muse, serene and eternal, waiting to play her music for anyone who wanted to listen. "Yes, baby, she's helping too." That night, after Hope was asleep and James was grading papers in his study, Sarah sat alone in the living room, looking at the locket Margaret Hartley had given her years ago. Theodore and Eleanor smiled up at her, frozen in a moment of happiness before tragedy had found them. "I did my best," she whispered to the photographs. "I hope it was enough." The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock James had bought at an antique shop. It reminded him of Theodore's craftsmanship, he'd said, a connection to the past. Sarah closed the locket and pressed it against her heart. Tomorrow there would be more challenges. The museum needed a new roof. The foundation was considering expanding its programs. Hope would start kindergarten in the fall, and Sarah wasn't ready for her baby to be that grown up. But tonight, in this moment of peace, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten was possible. Contentment. She had lost so much. Her parents, her grandmother Derek, years of her life spent grieving, fighting, surviving. But she had also gained hope. James. A community that had embraced her as one of their own. A purpose that gave meaning to every day. And a legacy that would outlast them all. The composer's muse would play for generations to come. Children would learn craftsmanship in Theodore's restored workshop. Scholars would study Eleanor's story. The truth would be preserved. Blood had found blood, and in finding it, Sarah had found herself. She stood stretched and walked to the window. The moon was full tonight, casting silver light across Millbrook's quiet streets. Somewhere out there, Henry was probably still awake, working on one of his projects. Rosie May was prepping for tomorrow's breakfast rush. James was lost in his books doing what he loved. Her people. Her family, not by blood, but by something stronger. Choice. Sarah smiled and went upstairs to check on her daughter. Hope was sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant Derek had bought before he died. Sarah had found it in storage after his death, still in its original packaging, a gift he'd planned for the baby he would never meet. "Sleep well, little one," Sarah whispered, adjusting the blanket. "Tomorrow's going to be a good day." She didn't know that for certain, of course. Life had taught her that certainty was an illusion, but hope wasn't. Hope was real, and hope was lying right in front of her, breathing softly, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds dream. That was enough. That was everything. Sarah closed the door quietly and went to join her husband. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and whatever it brought, she would face it the way she'd faced everything else. One step at a time. One day at a time. One choice at a time. That was the Mitchell way. And she was proud to carry the name. 10 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell first stood at the gates of an abandoned warehouse, pregnant and alone with nothing but $96 and a letter from a lawyer. Now she stood in the same spot watching her daughter Hope run across the manicured grounds of the Mitchell Museum, chasing her younger brother Daniel through gardens that had once been overgrown wilderness. "Mom, Daniel took my notebook." "Did not?" "Did too." Sarah laughed, a sound that still surprised her sometimes. For so long, laughter had felt impossible. Now it came easily, naturally, like breathing. "Both of you settle down, we have guests coming." James emerged from the museum's main entrance, straightening his tie. Even after 8 years of marriage, the sight of him still made Sarah's heart skip. "The delegation from the Smithsonian just arrived," he said. "They're very impressed with the restoration wing." "They should be. Henry spent 3 years getting it perfect." Henry Blackwood, now 82 and officially retired, still came to the museum every day. He couldn't stay away. The workshop was in his blood, just as it had been in Theodore's. "Where is he?" Sarah asked. "Where do you think showing the new apprentices how to properly care for the hand tools?" Sarah smiled. Some things never changed. She gathered the children and headed inside where the Smithsonian delegation waited in the main gallery. 3 museum professionals impeccably dressed standing before the composer's muse with expressions of barely contained awe. "Mrs. Cooper," the lead delegate said, extending her hand. "Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. Thank you for meeting with us." "Of course. What can I do for the Smithsonian?" Dr. Okonkwo exchanged glances with her colleagues. "We'd like to make a proposal. As you know, the Smithsonian has been expanding its collection of significant American artifacts, items that represent not just artistic achievement, but cultural and historical importance." Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew where this was going. "We'd like to acquire the composer's muse, for permanent display in Washington." The words hung in the air. Hope and Daniel had stopped their squabbling, sensing the tension. James moved to stand beside Sarah, his hand finding hers. "The automaton isn't for sale. We're prepared to offer $35 million, plus a significant endowment for your education programs." $35 million. Sarah's mind reeled. That money could transform the foundation, fund scholarships for decades, expand programs into every rural community in Pennsylvania. But she shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, Dr. Okonkwo, but the composer's muse belongs here. This is where Theodore Mitchell restored her. This is where Eleanor Mitchell loved her. This is where the truth was finally told. Mrs. Cooper, with respect, a small-town museum can't provide the same level of preservation or exposure that the Smithsonian can. The automaton would be seen by millions." "She's seen by thousands here, and every one of them learns the full story, not just about the craftsmanship, but about the people, the sacrifices, the justice that took decades to achieve." Sarah's voice was firm. "That context matters. It would be lost in Washington." Dr. Okonkwo pressed her lips together, clearly frustrated. "Perhaps you could consider a loan arrangement. The automaton could spend part of each year at the Smithsonian." "I'll think about it," Sarah said, though she already knew her answer. "But today isn't the day for decisions. Today is the anniversary." The delegation looked confused. 10 years ago today, I arrived in Millbrook. I had nothing. No family, no money, no hope." Sarah looked at the automaton, at her children, at the life she'd built from ruins. "Everything changed that day, and I honor that by being here with the people who helped me survive." Dr. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "I understand. We'll be in touch." After they left, James squeezed Sarah's hand. "You okay?" "I'm fine. It's just hard sometimes, saying no to that kind of money." "You made the right choice." "Did I?" The Foundation could do so much with $35 million. The Foundation is doing plenty, and the automaton is doing what Theodore intended, teaching, inspiring, telling the truth. James kissed her forehead. Your great-uncle didn't hide her for 30 years so she could end up behind velvet ropes in D.C. Sarah leaned into him, drawing strength from his steadiness. I know, I just wonder sometimes if I'm being selfish. You're being loyal. There's a difference. Sidium. The anniversary celebration began at sunset. The entire town of Millbrook turned out. Rosie May, now 93 and using a walker but still sharp as ever, held court from a specially positioned chair. Henry stood beside the automaton, explaining her mechanisms to a group of wide-eyed children. Patricia Johnson, who had become one of Sarah's closest friends, circulated with a glass of champagne and a satisfied smile. And there were others. People Sarah hadn't expected to see. Agent Rodriguez, retired, now had driven up from Philadelphia. Detective Morrison from Pittsburgh. Catherine Wells, whose book had won 3 awards and been optioned for a film. Even Claire Hartley, great-granddaughter of Edmund Hartley, had come with her family. The two women had developed an unlikely friendship over the years, bound by their shared determination to honor the truth rather than hide from it. Quite a turnout, Claire said, joining Sarah near the refreshment table. Your great-uncle would be amazed. I think he'd be uncomfortable with all the attention. Probably, but proud too. Look what you've built. Sarah looked. The museum expanded 3 times over the years, now housed not just the automaton, but an entire collection of restored mechanical wonders. The education center trained dozens of apprentices annually. The foundation had funded scholarships for over 100 students, and at the center of it all, the composer's muse played on her eternal music, drawing visitors from around the world. I didn't build it alone, Sarah said. No one ever does, but you were the catalyst, the spark that lit the fire. Before Sarah could respond, Hope came running up, breathless with excitement. Mom, there's someone at the gate. She says she knew great-great-uncle Theodore. Sarah frowned. Theodore had been dead for over a decade. Anyone who knew him well would be elderly now, and she thought she'd met them all. Did she give a name? She said to tell you the second key finally found its way home. Sarah's blood went cold. The second key. She excused herself and walked to the gate where an elderly woman waited in the gathering dusk. Thin, frail with white hair and eyes that held a lifetime of secrets. Mrs. Cooper, the woman said, my name is Anna Volkov. I've traveled a very long way to see you. You knew my great-uncle? I knew him, and I knew the composer's muse when she was young. Anna's voice carried a faint accent Russian, perhaps softened by decades in America. May I come in? What I have to tell you will take some time. Sarah led her to a quiet corner of the museum away from the celebration. Something about this woman demanded privacy attention. I was born in St. Petersburg. Anna began settling into a chair with the careful movements of the very old. In 1938, my grandmother was a lady-in-waiting to Empress Alexandra. When the revolution came, she escaped with only what she could carry. Including the automaton. Anna shook her head. Including the key to the automaton. The composer's muse was already gone by then, smuggled out separately. But my grandmother had the original winding key, the one Henri Maillardet himself had crafted. Sarah's heart hammered. The original key, but Theodore used a replacement. Yes, because the original was lost, or so everyone believed. Anna reached into her handbag and withdrew a velvet pouch. My grandmother passed this to my mother and my mother to me. I've kept it safe for 80 years waiting for the right moment. She opened the pouch and spilled its contents into her palm. A key. Small, golden, ornate beyond anything Sarah had ever seen. The handle was shaped like a swan, its wings spread wide, tiny diamonds glittering in its eyes. This is the key Maillardet made for the Empress, Anna said. It's been in my family for over a century. But it belongs with the automaton. Sarah stared at the key, her mind racing. Why now? Why come forward after all this time? Because I read Ms. Wells' book. I learned what your great-uncle sacrificed to protect the muse. I learned what you sacrificed to bring the truth to light. Anna pressed the key into Sarah's hand. I'm 91 years old, Mrs. Cooper. I have no children, no heirs. When I die, this key will be lost forever, unless I give it to someone who will honor its history. The key was warm in Sarah's palm, as if it held its own inner fire. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it. Say you'll let the muse play with her original heart. Sarah looked at the key, then at the automaton visible through the gallery window. For 10 years, she'd wound the muse with a replacement key. For 10 years, the music had been beautiful, but somehow incomplete. Will it work? After all this time? There's only one way to find out. The crowd had gathered around the automaton, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Sarah stood before the composer's Muse, the original key clutched in her hand, her heart pounding. "This key," she announced. Her voice, steady despite her nerves, was crafted by Henri Maillardet himself over 200 years ago. It was given to Empress Alexandra of Russia, then smuggled out during the Revolution, then passed through generations of one family until tonight. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Anna Volkov has traveled here to reunite the key with the automaton, to make the composer's Muse complete again. Sarah turned to face the mechanical woman who had changed her life. For a long moment she just looked, remembering everything. The first time she'd seen her dusty and hidden. The first time she'd heard her play. The truth she'd revealed, the justice she'd helped achieve. "Thank you," Sarah whispered too quietly for anyone else to hear. "For everything." Then she inserted the key. It fit perfectly, of course, as if it had been waiting all along. Sarah wound the mechanism, feeling the familiar resistance. But something was different, smoother, more precise. The gears engaged with a sound like a sigh of relief, and the composer's Muse began to play. The music that emerged was unlike anything Sarah had heard before. Richer, fuller, more nuanced. Notes she'd never noticed became clear. Harmonies that had been hinted at now rang true. The Bach invention was transformed from a beautiful piece into something transcendent. And then when that piece ended, something happened that made the entire room gasp. The automaton didn't stop. Her hands shifted on the keyboard. A new melody began. Something Sarah had never heard her play before. It was Russian. A folk song, perhaps, or a lullaby. Haunting and sweet, full of longing and hope. Anna Volkov was weeping. "That's my grandmother's song," she whispered. "The one she used to sing to me as a child. She always said the Empress loved it." "How is this possible?" Sarah breathed. "Theodore never programmed this." "He didn't need to." Anna's voice was thick with tears. "It was already there, hidden in the original mechanism. The Empress had it added as a secret gift, but it would only play with the original key." The song continued, filling the gallery with music that hadn't been heard in over a century. A gift from a murdered empress finally delivered. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Then Hope's voice, clear and young, broke through. "That was beautiful, Mommy. Can she play it again?" Sarah laughed, wiping her own tears. "I think she can, sweetheart. I think she can play it as many times as we want." The celebration continued late into the night. Anna Volkov was treated like visiting royalty, surrounded by people eager to hear her stories. The discovery of the hidden Russian melody made headlines the next morning, bringing a new wave of attention to the museum. But for Sarah, the real significance was personal. She sat alone with Anna after the crowds had gone, listening to the old woman share memories of her grandmother, of Russian aristocracy, of a world that had been swept away by revolution and war. "My grandmother always said the Muse was special," Anna said. "Not just because of her value, but because of what she represented. Beauty that survives, art that endures, the human spirit captured in gears and springs." Theodore understood that. He did. That's why he protected her so fiercely. Anna took Sarah's hand. "And now you understand it too. That's why you refused to sell her to the Smithsonian." Sarah startled. "How did you know about that?" "I was listening. Old women become invisible. We hear things." Anna smiled. "You made the right choice. The Muse belongs here where her story can be told properly, where people can understand what she cost and what she means. It's a lot of responsibility." "Yes, but you've proven you can carry it." Anna squeezed her hand. "Your great-uncle chose well when he left everything to you. Blood found blood, as he always believed it would." The next morning, Sarah woke early. The house was quiet, James and the children still sleeping. She slipped out and drove to the museum, letting herself in with her key. The composer's Muse waited in her gallery, silent now, bathed in the soft light of dawn. Sarah sat on the bench before her and just looked. 10 years. So much had changed. So much had been lost and gained and fought for. She thought about Derek, who would never see their daughter grow up, about her parents and grandmother stolen by Victor Kane's greed, about Theodore and Eleanor, whose love story had ended in tragedy but whose legacy lived on. And she thought about herself. The terrified pregnant widow who had arrived in Millbrook with nothing. The woman who had fought killers and corporations and her own despair. The mother-wife and guardian who had somehow built something meaningful from the ruins of her family. "I hope I made you proud," she said to the automaton, to Theodore, to Eleanor, to everyone who had sacrificed. The Muse didn't answer, of course. She was wood and metal and glass, not flesh and blood. But in the silence, Sarah felt something. A presence. A warmth. As if the people she'd lost were standing beside her, nodding their approval. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was grief playing tricks. Or maybe love really did transcend death. Sarah reached out and touched the automaton's porcelain hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a purpose. For giving me a family. For giving me hope." She wound the original key and let the music play. The Russian melody filled the empty gallery, a gift from the past to the present, a bridge between generations. And Sarah sat and listened, at peace. 6 months later, the phone call came. Victor Kane was dead. He had died in his cell alone of a heart attack. No family had claimed the body. No one had attended the small service the prison had arranged. Sarah received the news with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. The man who had destroyed her family was finally gone, but also something unexpected. Pity. Victor Kane had spent his entire life chasing wealth-power things. He had murdered and manipulated and destroyed without remorse. And in the end, he had died with nothing. No legacy, no love, no meaning, the opposite of Theodore Mitchell, who had lived modestly, protected fiercely, and left behind something that would outlast them all. "How do you feel?" James asked, finding her on the porch that evening. "I don't know. Empty, maybe. I expected to feel triumphant." "And you don't—" "I just feel tired." Sarah leaned against him. "I spent so many years hating him, fighting him. Now he's gone, and I don't know what to do with all that energy." "Maybe that's the point. Maybe now you can finally let it go." Let it go, such simple words for such a complicated thing. But as Sarah sat there watching the sun set over Millbrook, she realized James was right. The fight was over. The enemy was defeated. Not by violence or revenge, but by time and justice and truth. Victor Kane had lost, not just legally, but existentially. Everything he had tried to steal still existed, protected and preserved and shared with the world. His crimes had been exposed. His victims had been honored. His legacy was nothing but cautionary tales, while Theodore Mitchell's legacy grew stronger every day. "I think I'm okay," Sarah said finally. "I think I'm going to be okay." James kissed her temple. "You always were, even when you didn't believe it." Hope graduated from high school 12 years after Sarah first arrived in Millbrook. The ceremony was held outdoors on a perfect June day. Sarah sat in the front row with James and Daniel, watching her daughter walk across the stage with Derek's eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin. "Hope Teresa Mitchell," the principal announced. "Valedictorian." The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah was crying before Hope even reached the podium. Her daughter's speech was about legacy, about family, about the strange paths life takes and the unexpected destinations we find. "My mother came to Millbrook with nothing," Hope said, her voice strong and clear. She was pregnant alone broke. The only thing she had was a letter telling her she'd inherited an abandoned warehouse from an uncle she'd never met. Sarah gripped James's hand, tears streaming down her face. She could have sold that property and walked away. Could have taken the money and started fresh somewhere else. But she didn't. She stayed. She fought. She uncovered the truth about our family, brought a murderer to justice, and built something that will outlast all of us. Hope looked directly at her mother. "Mom taught me that legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you protect, what you build, what you pass on. The composer's muse is beautiful, but she's just metal and wood. What makes her important is the story, the sacrifice, the love." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Hope found Sarah in the crowd and threw her arms around her. "I meant every word," Hope said. "You're my hero, Mom. You always have been." Sarah held her daughter tight, remembering the baby she'd carried through fear and uncertainty, the toddler who'd taken her first steps in the museum, the child who'd asked if the lady in the glass was helping them. "I love you," Sarah said, "more than anything in this world." "I love you too." Hope pulled back, grinning. "Now can we please go to Rosie Mae's? I've been craving her pie for weeks." Sarah laughed. "Some things never change. The important things never should." Rosie Mae Johnson passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months after Hope's graduation. She was 95 years old. The funeral was the largest Millbrook had ever seen. People came from 3 states to pay their respects to the woman who had fed them, counseled them, and loved them through decades of small-town life. Sarah delivered the eulogy. "Rosie Mae Johnson was the first person in Millbrook to show me kindness," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I walked into her diner pregnant and terrified, and she sat me down and refused to let me pay for breakfast. She said Millbrook takes care of its own." The church was silent except for soft weeping. She was right. This town does take care of its own, and Rosie May was the heart of that care. She fed the hungry, counseled the troubled, celebrated the joyful. She was grandmother to everyone who walked through her door. Sarah paused, gathering herself. When I asked her once why she was so generous, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Child, we're all just passing through. The only thing that matters is what we leave behind. I want to leave behind full bellies and warm hearts." Sarah looked at the casket draped in flowers from Rosie May's own garden. "You succeeded, Rosie May. You left behind a town that's better because you were in it. A community that learned kindness by your example. And one stubborn pregnant widow who wouldn't have survived without you." She stepped down from the podium, walked to the casket, and placed her hand on the polished wood. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The diner continued under new management run by Rosie May's great niece, but everyone agreed it wasn't quite the same. Some things couldn't be replaced. Some people couldn't be replaced. Henry Blackwood followed Rosie May 6 months later. He died in his workshop, surrounded by his tools, a half-finished music box on the bench before him. He went exactly how he would have wanted, Sarah told Hope at the funeral, doing what he loved. "Is that what you want, to die doing what you love?" Sarah considered the question. "I think I want to die knowing I did what mattered, whether I'm working or resting or surrounded by family, as long as I know my life meant something." "It does, Mom. It always has." The losses hit Sarah hard. First Rosie May, then Henry, two of the people who had helped her most when she'd had nothing. The pillars of her Millbrook family gone. But life continued as it always does. Hope went to college, then graduate school studying museum curation and historical preservation. She planned to return to Millbrook eventually to take over the Foundation's education programs. Daniel discovered a passion for engineering. Spending hours in the workshop Henry had left behind, teaching himself the mechanical skills that had been Theodore's gift. And Sarah and James grew older together, watching their children thrive, watching the museum evolve, watching the composer's Muse play for visitor after visitor. On the 20th anniversary of Sarah's arrival in Millbrook, the town threw a celebration. 300 people gathered at the museum, former scholarship recipients who had gone on to careers in medicine, law, engineering, art, apprentices who now ran their own workshops across the country, families who had benefited from the Foundation's programs. And at the center of it all, the composer's Muse still playing, still beautiful, still telling her story. Sarah gave a speech as she had so many times before, but this time she spoke not about the past, but about the future. 20 years ago, I came here with nothing, she said. Today I stand before you with everything, a family, a community, a purpose. She looked at James, at Hope, and Daniel, at the faces of friends and colleagues and strangers who had become family. The composer's Muse will outlive all of us. She was built to endure, but her meaning comes from us, from the stories we tell, the truths we protect, the love we share. Sarah paused, feeling the weight of 2 decades. Theodore Mitchell hid her because he believed beauty was worth protecting. Eleanor Mitchell loved her because she represented hope. Victor Kane wanted to steal her because he thought value came from possession. She shook her head. They were all partially right. Beauty is worth protecting. The Muse does represent hope, and she is incredibly valuable. But the real treasure isn't the automaton, it's this. She gestured at the crowd. Community, connection, the understanding that we're all part of something larger than ourselves. The applause was long and heartfelt. After the speeches, after the toasts, after the celebration wound down, Sarah found herself alone in the gallery with the composer's Muse. It was late. The museum was closed. James and the children had gone home. Just Sarah and the mechanical woman who had changed her life. "I'm getting old," Sarah said softly. "Not as old as you, but old enough. Sometimes I wonder if I've done enough, if I've honored your story properly." The automaton was silent, of course, but Sarah could have sworn she saw understanding in those glass eyes. "Hope will take care of you when I'm gone. She understands what you mean, what you represent." Sarah smiled. "She's better than me in a lot of ways. Smarter, more patient, less stubborn." She wound the key one final time, letting the music fill the empty gallery. "Thank you," Sarah said as the melody played, "for giving me a reason to fight, for leading me to truth, for showing me that beauty can survive anything." The composer's Muse played on her eternal song, echoing through the darkness, and Sarah Cooper, formerly Sarah Mitchell, widow and mother and guardian, listened until the last note faded. Then she turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked home. The composer's muse remained where she had been for decades, playing her music, telling her story, waiting for the next generation to learn, to grow, to understand. She would wait forever if she had to, because that's what legacies do. They endure, they teach, they inspire, and in the end, they prove that love, truth, and beauty are stronger, that kind stronger than greed, lies, and hate. Sarah Mitchell arrived in Millbrook with nothing but a letter and a prayer. She left behind a legacy that would last forever, and in that transformation she discovered the truth her great-uncle had always known. Blood finds blood, love outlasts death, and the things we protect with our whole hearts become the treasures that change the world. This was the story of the composer's muse. This was the story of the Mitchell family. This was the story of one woman who refused to give up, refused to sell out, refused to let the darkness win. And in the end, it was a story about hope. Not the desperate hope of a pregnant widow standing at the gates of an abandoned warehouse, but the triumphant hope of a legacy fulfilled, a truth revealed, and a love that echoed through generations. The composer's muse would play forever, and so would the song Sarah Mitchell had begun. That was her true inheritance. That was her eternal gift. That was what it meant to be a Mitchell, to carry the name, to honor the past while building the future. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.